Hey everyone, I'm Jordan with 9to5 Toys, and today we're checking out the RTX 4060. Mainly this is the PNY XLR8 version of it, which is non-MSRP, means it's a little bit more expensive. If you've been following these cards, then you probably know about the 4060 Ti, which you can check out our review up here in the corner. And considering that most of the embargoes for most of the cards lifted yesterday, you probably already know a fair bit about this card, but we'll dive in and take a look at it anyways. And in the background here, you can see we have Battlefield 2042 running. I have the MSI Afterburner overlay on, so we can take a look at some of the performance on there, but we'll also take a look at some other performance benchmarks. So let's dive in and check it out. Thanks for watching 9to5 Toys. Be sure to like, subscribe, and enable notifications with the bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming videos. As we mentioned, this is the 4060. This is the non-MSRP version, so it's a little bit more expensive than the 4060, the normal version, which really, that one is what I would recommend. You know, for the extra money, what are you getting with this? I mean, it is a 3-fan version of it. It also has some RGB built into it. You can see the RGB going over here, but other than that, you're not really getting a whole lot. And this is very much geared towards budget players. People are very mindful of their budget, so spending a little bit more money and just getting, you know, some RGB isn't necessarily something that I think most people are going to be interested in. But let's talk about the card itself, talk about the performance. You know, NVIDIA is clearly positioning this as a 1080p gaming GPU, but in my experience, it's working pretty well at 1440 as well, which is what we have running here. And if you can see, the white number right here is the FPS. So around 100 FPS, 1440. I have it in the ultra settings. I have DLSS turned on to balanced right now, and I have NVIDIA Reflex on and boosted. So that's what I'm getting. Obviously, it drops down when you get into more chaotic gameplay, like playing Rush XL. That number typically drops down to around like in the 70s and 80s. But if you're playing something that isn't as crazy, you can get some really smooth FPS from this card. But as we move into the specs here, you'll see that that really heavily relies on NVIDIA's new software packages, DLSS 3, and Reflex Boost and everything. And so it's not necessarily that they made the card a lot faster and like increased its performance, which you'll see in the specs. Actually, some things are kind of downgraded over previous generations. We just got booted to the main title screen for being inactive in this, so we'll go back in. But you'll see that some of the specs are actually downgraded from like the previous generation, but they're relying heavily on their software to kind of tell this new story of how much faster these cards are. And when DLSS is available and useful, it does a really good job of giving you some impressive performance, when compared to some other cards that don't have it. So quickly here, let's do a rundown of all the specs. This is the PNY XLR8 4060, coming in at $340. Core clock of 1830 megahertz, boost up to 2505 megahertz, 3072 CUDA cores, 8 gigabytes of GDDR6, a 128-bit memory interface, which is down from previous generation, memory clock speed of 17,000 megahertz, TDP of 115 watts, it's using DisplayPort 1.4a, a single 8-pin power connector, and it also supports AV1 encoding. So some major takeaways from that spec sheet are that the 3060, the previous generation, had more memory and also a faster memory interface. 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 with a memory interface of 192-bit to be exact. So it's unfortunate that NVIDIA can't, at least match that. We don't really want to see a downgrade in performance in this thing in raw horsepower. And in fact, those numbers are also right in par with one of the latest from AMD, the RX 7600, that starts at just $270. That card has the same amount of memory and the same 128-bit memory interface. And if you want to learn more about that card, I will link to Patrick's review over on 9to5toys.com in the description. You can check that out and hear a little bit more about it. So then it all comes down to real world performance. How does this card actually perform in use? And when the titles support DLSS, it's performing pretty well. The main titles that I tested this in are Battlefield 2042 and Forza Horizon 5 because, well, these are games that I usually play. And we also did the Heaven benchmark because we've been doing that with some of the other cards so we can get a real comparison between these cards and their raw computing power. So first off, let's talk about Battlefield 2042. As you can see, we've had it running. We already talked about the numbers a little bit, usually right around 100 FPS. And that is in kind of a normal gaming scenario, I would say. Like I mentioned earlier, when you are playing Rush XL, it's 64 v 64, and it's all concentrated on 2 points. There is a lot going on there. That drops performance down to around 70 to 75 FPS, and this is at 1440p with the graphics set to ultra. We have DLSS on and set to balanced, and we also have NVIDIA Reflex on and set to boost. Of course, dropping those numbers down to 1080p does give us a little bit more performance. We'll do that real quick here. You can see immediately we're up to around 115, 120 FPS. So we're getting a nice little increase there. Although, personally, I prefer the 1440 gaming experience, and so it would be worth it to me to lose a little bit of performance to keep that resolution. And we'll pop it back up to 1440. We'll leave DLSS turned off so you can get an idea of what that looks like. And now we're kind of down in the mid 70s. So definitely a performance hit when you turn DLSS off. Having that on does make a big difference. So we just turned it back on. We're back up to around 100 FPS when playing at 1440. And also playing Forza Horizon 5, the 4060 performed pretty well at 1440p as well. You know, NVIDIA keeps talking about this as a 1080p gaming graphics card, but 1440 seems to be doing okay as well. With all of the NVIDIA enhancements turned off, the card was able to reach over 80 FPS with graphics set to extreme. And then turning on NVIDIA Super Resolution and frame generation, that brought that number up to 94 FPS, which is basically the same numbers we were getting on the 4060 Ti when playing Forza Horizon 5. And then lastly, for benchmarks, we'll talk about the Heaven benchmark. This has been around for a long time. It's just kind of like a raw performance synthetic benchmark. And for that, the 4060 was getting 66.1 FPS. And that's compared to 71.1 of the 4060 Ti. And in fact, that 66.1 is the exact same score as the RX 7600 that's priced at $270. So you can kind of see there, you know, when it comes to just like the raw performance, what the cards are capable of. You know, when there is DLSS that is capable of being used, this card performs very well, and NVIDIA is able to really capitalize on that. But in some circumstances, when that's not capable, the raw performance, you're going to see a little bit of a hit, and it's not going to be as powerful as some older generation cards that are around the same price point, and then also some of the competition. But as you can see here, I think up in, yeah, you can kind of see it up here in the corner. This is the power draw of the card, which has been hovering a little bit over 100 watts. I think we just saw 108. Typically, it's been around 100. When I am gaming using this card quite a bit, you can see the percentage usage is right around 97, and it's been pretty darn high for most of this. So it's using about as much of the card as it can. And another note on that, you know, in the H7 Flow case here, I can also barely hear the card. It's very quiet when in use, so that's not something you need to worry about. So we're gonna keep this review pretty short and sweet. You know, when it comes to titles that are able to take advantage of the NVIDIA software enhancements, this card does perform pretty well. Like I said, I'd be happy gaming in 1440p on this card when playing Battlefield 2042 with everything set to the max. Likewise, I'd play at max on 1440 when playing Forza Horizon 5. But on some other titles and benchmarks like Heaven, you're not going to see that same performance that don't support those NVIDIA software enhancements. So depending on what you're doing with the card, you know, what your intentions are, I think there are going to be some other cards that are a better bet. You know, a lot of other reviewers are talking about some of the older AMD cards, some of the last generation stuff that you can get for a similar price and get better performance out of that. But if you are hoping to step into NVIDIA, you know, NVIDIA Studio has a lot of bonuses with it as well. NVIDIA Broadcast is something that I use quite a bit when I am streaming or even when I am just gaming. You know, that's something that's also rolled into this package. So NVIDIA has a compelling product when all those software align with DLSS 3, with Reflex, and then also with NVIDIA Studio. But if you aren't worried about those things or aren't using titles or programs that support any of those things, then maybe you want to look for a different card. And if you are interested in the 4060, personally, I probably wouldn't go with this PNY version. The $40 price increase to get the RGB isn't necessarily worth it, in my opinion, because this is a budget card where you're going to be really mindful of how much everything costs. So I'll put a couple links down in the description if you are interested in checking one of those cards out. All right, and that's going to do it for this look at the 4060, the PNY XLR8 4060. Let us know what you think about it down in the comments below. Are you going to be picking up a new card from NVIDIA, or are you going to wait a little bit, do some more research, or are you going to pick up something, you know, from the previous generation? Let us know what you think down in the comments below. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up so others can find it easier, and consider subscribing. This is Jordan with 9to5 Toys.